The first gunshot of the evening tore through the saloon window, just as Zadie Reynolds stepped off the stagecoach into Fort McDowell, Arizona Territory, 1878. She flinched, clutching her carpetbag tighter as men scattered from the saloon doors, some diving for cover, others drawing weapons of their own. This was hardly the welcome she'd imagined after 3 days of bone-jarring travel from San Francisco. "Welcome to Fort McDowell, madam," the stagecoach driver called down with a chuckle. "Thursday nights tend to get lively." Zadie straightened her travel-worn dress and adjusted her hat, determination setting her jaw firm. At 26, she had traveled farther than most women she knew, and she hadn't come all this way to be frightened off by a little frontier chaos. "Is there a reputable boarding house nearby?" she asked, ignoring the continued shouts from the saloon. The driver pointed down the dusty Main Street. "Mrs. Holloway runs a clean place 3 buildings past the general store. Tell her Bert sent you." Zadie thanked him and began walking, careful to keep to the boardwalk and away from the muddy street. Fort McDowell was smaller than she'd expected, a single main street with wooden buildings lining both sides, most of them weathered by sun and wind. The mountains in the distance glowed purple in the setting sun, their beauty a stark contrast to the rough-hewn settlement. She'd nearly reached the general store when the saloon doors burst open again, and a man was forcibly ejected, landing hard in the dirt. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' growth of beard shadowing his face. "That's the 3rd time this month, Archer," shouted the bartender from the doorway. "Next time I'm letting Sheriff Davies lock you up." The man called Archer rose slowly, dusting himself off with deliberate movements. Even from a distance, Zadie could see the dangerous stillness in him, like a coiled snake. His eyes, cold and hard, scanned the gathering crowd before settling on her. For a moment, they locked gazes, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, though they'd never met. Then his lip curled in what might have been disgust or dismissal, and he turned away, stalking toward the livery stable at the end of the street. "Don't mind Archer Hollis," said a female voice beside Zadie. She turned to find a plump, pleasant-faced woman with graying hair. "He's had a hard go of it these past few years." "I wasn't minding him at all," Zadie replied, though she found herself looking after his retreating figure. The woman laughed. "I'm Eleanor Holloway. You looking for a place to stay?" "Yes, as a matter of fact. The stagecoach driver Bert recommended your establishment." Mrs. Holloway beamed. "Well then, come along. You'll be wanting to wash the travel dust off before supper." As they walked, Zadie couldn't help asking, "That man, Mr. Hollis, what happened to him?" Mrs. Holloway's smile faded. "Lost his family in the Indian raids 5 years back. His wife, little boy, everything. Used to be the friendliest rancher in the territory. Now he's just angry at everything that breathes." Zadie glanced back toward the livery but could no longer see him. Something in the set of his shoulders, the hardness of his face, had struck her. She recognized that kind of pain, had seen it in her own mirror often enough. "Here we are," Mrs. Holloway announced, leading her into a 2-story clapboard house, freshly painted white with blue trim. Inside was clean and homey, with a parlor that smelled of beeswax and lemon oil. "How long will you be staying with us, Miss?" "Reynolds, Zadie Reynolds, and I'm not certain. I've come to take over my uncle's business." Mrs. Holloway's eyebrows rose. "You're Chester Reynolds' niece?" "The one from California?" "Yes. I received word of his passing last month." "Bless your heart. Chester was a good man. That store of his has been closed up since he died. People have been missing it something fierce." Zadie nodded. "I plan to reopen as soon as possible. Uncle Chester left everything to me and his will. I was his only living relative." "Well," Mrs. Holloway said, leading her upstairs to a small but comfortable bedroom. "You'll find Fort McDowell a friendly place, despite what you saw today. Most folks here are decent, hard-working people." "And Mr. Hollis, what about him?" Mrs. Holloway sighed. "Archer keeps to himself mostly out at his ranch, comes to town for supplies and whiskey, not much else. Best to give him a wide berth." Zadie set her carpetbag on the bed. "I'll keep that in mind." "Supper's at 6 sharp, Mrs. Holloway said, leaving her to settle in. Zadie moved to the window and looked out at the town, golden in the last rays of sunlight. Somewhere out there was her uncle's mercantile, her mercantile now and beyond the town. Somewhere in the hills was the ranch of Archer Hollis, a man who seemed as broken as the jagged mountains on the horizon. She had come to Fort McDowell seeking a fresh start after her own losses. She hadn't expected to find someone who might understand what that was like. The next morning, Zadie rose early and dressed carefully in one of her better dresses, a navy blue cotton with white piping. After a hearty breakfast provided by Mrs. Holloway, she made her way to her uncle's store. The key had been sent to her along with the notification of her inheritance, and she turned it in the lock with a sense of trepidation and excitement. The bell above the door jangled as she stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight streaming through the front windows. The store was larger than it had appeared from outside, with shelves lining the walls and tables displaying merchandise throughout the space. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but otherwise, the store seemed well organized and fully stocked. Zadie walked slowly through the aisles, running her fingers along the countertops, examining the inventory. Dry goods, tools, clothing, household items, everything a frontier town would need. At the back, she found a small office with ledgers neatly arranged on a desk. She sat down and opened the most recent one, relieved to see that her uncle had been a meticulous record keeper. The store had been profitable, with a healthy list of regular customers and outstanding accounts. This could work. This could be the new beginning she needed. The bell above the door jangled, startling her. She hadn't unlocked the front door. "Hello," she called, rising from the desk. When she emerged from the office, she found Archer Hollis standing just inside the entrance, hat in hand. In the clear morning light, she could see him properly for the first time. He was handsome in a harsh way, with strong features and eyes the color of a stormy sky. Those eyes widened slightly at the sight of her. "Store's not open," he said gruffly. "I'm aware," Zadie replied, lifting her chin. "I'm the new proprietor, Zadie Reynolds. Chester Reynolds was my uncle." Archer's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Chester never mentioned family. We weren't close. I hadn't seen him since I was a child." She moved behind the counter, putting a barrier between them. "How did you get in, Mr. Hollis?" He held up a key. "Chester gave me 1 year back. I sometimes come in early for supplies when I don't want to. Deal with people." The way he said it made it clear what kind of dealing he meant, the kind that had gotten him thrown out of the saloon the previous evening. "I see," Zadie said. "Well, I'll need that key back, Mr. Hollis." His jaw tightened. "The name's Archer." "Mr. Hollis," she repeated firmly, holding out her hand. "The key, please." For a moment, he looked like he might refuse or perhaps explode with anger. Then, unexpectedly, one corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Chester would have liked you," he said, dropping the key into her palm. "You've got his stubborn streak." The almost smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines and giving her a glimpse of the man he might have been before tragedy struck. As quickly as it appeared, it vanished. "When will the store be open?" he asked. "All business now." "Tomorrow, I hope." "I need to clean and take inventory today," he nodded. "I need supplies. Feed, ammunition, coffee, other things." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "My list." Zadie took it, noting the neat, precise handwriting. "I'll have everything ready by tomorrow afternoon." He put his hat back on. "I'll be back then." He turned to go, then paused. "You need help cleaning this place?" The offer surprised her. "No, thank you, I can manage. Suit yourself." He nodded once and left, the bell jangling behind him. Zadie looked down at the list in her hand, then at the key. There was more to Archer Hollis than the angry man she'd seen thrown from the saloon. She wasn't sure if that made him more or less dangerous. By late afternoon, Zadie had swept, dusted, and reorganized much of the store. She'd also identified items that needed restocking and familiarized herself with her uncle's system of bookkeeping. She was tired but satisfied with her progress when the bell jangled again. This time, it was Sheriff Davies, a tall man with a salt and pepper mustache and kind eyes. "Miss Reynolds," he said, removing his hat. "Thought I'd come by and introduce myself. Elias Davies, County Sheriff." "A pleasure, Sheriff," Zadie replied, wiping her dusty hands on her apron before shaking his offered hand. "Just wanted to welcome you to Fort McDowell and let you know my office is just down the street if you need anything." "Thank you. Everyone has been very kind so far." The sheriff smiled. "Chester was well respected around here. Folks are glad his store won't be closing permanently." He glanced around the shop. "I see you've been hard at work." "Yes, I'm hoping to open tomorrow." "That's good news." He seemed to hesitate. "I heard Archer Hollis paid you a visit this morning." Zadie raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast in Fort McDowell." "Small town," the sheriff said with a shrug. "Listen, I don't mean to alarm you, but Archer can be unpredictable these days. If he gives you any trouble, you let me know right away." "He seemed civil enough," Zadie said, remembering that brief, transformative, almost smile. "He has his good days and bad days," the sheriff conceded. "Used to be one of the finest men in the territory. Tragedy changes people. So I've heard." Zadie busied herself straightening a display of tinware. "Was there anything else, Sheriff?" He seemed to sense her dismissal. "No, madam. Just wanted to make you feel welcome." He settled his hat back on his head. "Good day to you." After he left, Zadie sat down behind the counter, suddenly weary. She'd come to Fort McDowell seeking anonymity and a fresh start, hoping to leave behind her own painful memories of loss. Instead, she found herself intrigued by a man who seemed to embody the very grief she was trying to escape. The rest of the day passed quickly as Zadie continued her work. By evening, the store was clean and organized, ready to open for business the next day. She returned to the boarding house tired but satisfied. At supper, Mrs. Holloway introduced her to the other boarders. A young schoolteacher named Miss Parker, an elderly gentleman who worked at the bank, and a traveling salesman who was passing through town. The conversation was pleasant, centered around local news and gentle inquiries about Zadie's background. She kept her answers vague, mentioning only that she'd been living in San Francisco before coming to Arizona. She didn't speak of her late husband, Thomas, or the illness that had taken him after just 2 years of marriage. Nor did she mention the baby they'd lost shortly after. Those wounds were still too raw to expose to strangers, however kindly they might be. After the meal, Zadie excused herself and retired to her room. From her window, she could see the main street, quiet now except for the yellow light spilling from the saloon. As she watched, a solitary figure on horseback rode slowly out of town, tall, straight-backed, unmistakably Archer Hollis. Where was he going so late? Back to his ranch, presumably, though it seemed a lonely time to make such a journey. She wondered what kind of home he returned to. Was it well kept in memory of his lost family, or had it fallen into disrepair like its owner? She turned away from the window, chiding herself for her curiosity. Archer Hollis's life was none of her concern. She had a business to run and her own healing to focus on. Still, as she prepared for bed, she found herself thinking of his storm-gray eyes and the moment when his almost smile had revealed the ghost of a different man. The morning dawned clear and warm, promising a busy day. Zadie dressed in a practical brown skirt and white shirtwaist, pinning her honey-colored hair into a neat bun. After breakfast, she hurried to the store, excitement and nervousness fluttering in her stomach. She just finished setting up the cash register when the first customers arrived, a woman with 2 small children in tow, looking for fabric and buttons. "It's so good to have the mercantile open again," the woman said as Zadie measured out yards of calico. "Chester's passing left a big hole in this town." "I'm glad to be continuing his business," Zadie replied with a smile. Throughout the morning, a steady stream of customers came through the doors, many introducing themselves and welcoming her to Fort McDowell. By noon, Zadie was feeling more optimistic about her decision to come here. The people were friendly, the business promising, and for the first time in months she felt purposeful. During a lull, she remembered Archer's list and began gathering the items he'd requested. Feed, ammunition, coffee, tobacco, salt, sugar, flour, bacon, and several other staples. It was a substantial order, suggesting he didn't come to town often. She was just finishing when the bell jangled and Archer himself walked in. He looked different today, cleaner, his dark hair damp as if freshly washed, his face newly shaven. He wore a blue shirt that matched his eyes, and though his expression remained guarded, he nodded politely to her. "Miss Reynolds, Mr. Hollis, I have your order ready." She gestured to the crates and sacks she'd prepared. He moved to inspect them, checking each item against his list. "Thorough," he commented. "I aim to run an efficient business," she replied, moving behind the counter to calculate his bill. "Chester always gave me credit," Archer said, watching her. Zadie looked up. "Do you have an account with the store?" "I do." She consulted the ledger and found his name. True enough, he had a long-standing account that was regularly paid in full. "Very well. I'll add this to your account." He nodded, then began loading his supplies onto a small wagon she hadn't noticed outside. Zadie watched him work, noting the efficient strength in his movements. When he'd finished, he returned to the counter. "You need anything out at your place?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "I'm sorry, your uncle's house. It's been sitting empty for weeks, might need some repairs." Oh, she hadn't even visited the house yet, having been focused on the store. "I haven't decided if I'll live there or stay at the boarding house." Archer's expression was unreadable. "House is better. More private. It's a good place. Chester built it solid. I'll keep that in mind." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Hollis." He shrugged. "Just being neighborly." The word seemed incongruous coming from him, given everything she'd heard. Perhaps he was making an effort to be civil for Chester's sake. "Will there be anything else?" she asked. He seemed about to leave, then paused. "There's a storm coming. Couple of days, maybe. You might want to stock up on lamp oil and candles. Power lines go down sometimes." Zadie blinked. "There's no electricity in Fort McDowell." For the first time, he laughed, a short, rusty sound as if long unused. "Figure of speech. I meant the telegraph lines." She felt her cheeks warm. "Of course." That almost smile appeared again, lingering a moment longer this time. "You'll get used to frontier life, Miss Reynolds." Then he was gone, leaving Zadie with the distinct impression that she'd just passed some sort of test. The rest of the day passed in a blur of customers and transactions. By closing time, Zadie was exhausted but pleased with her first day of business. She locked up, then decided to walk to her uncle's house before returning to the boarding house. The house was on the edge of town, a modest but well-built structure with a small porch. Using the key she'd found among her uncle's papers, she let herself in. The interior was dusty but otherwise well kept. Simple, sturdy furniture, a few bookshelves filled with volumes, a kitchen with a cast iron stove. It felt like a home rather than just a house, a place where someone had lived a full life. In the bedroom, she found a photograph on the dresser, a much younger Chester with a pretty woman and a small child. The family he'd lost long ago, according to Mrs. Holloway. Perhaps that was why he'd never mentioned them to Zadie. Loss seemed to be a common thread in Fort McDowell. She was locking up when she noticed a rider approaching not from town, but from the direction of the open country beyond. As the figure drew closer, she recognized Archer, riding hard. He reined in sharply when he saw her. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "Visiting my property," she replied, bristling at his tone. "Is that a problem?" He dismounted, tying his horse to the porch rail. "Saw someone moving around in here, didn't know it was you." "Were you checking on the house?" He looked uncomfortable. "Promised Chester I'd keep an eye on the place." "That was kind of you," she said, softening. Archer looked past her at the house. "You going to live here?" "I'm considering it," he nodded. "Needs work." "Roof leaks in the back bedroom when it rains hard," Zadie sighed. "I wouldn't know how to fix that." "I would." The offer was implicit in his tone. "Why would you help me, Mr. Hollis? You don't even know me." His eyes met hers, and for a moment the hardness in them receded. "Knew Chester. He'd want me to." It seemed a simple explanation, yet Zadie sensed there was more to it. "Were you and my uncle friends?" Archer looked away. "He helped me after what happened. When most folks were walking on eggshells around me or avoiding me altogether, Chester just treated me normal. Gave me work sometimes when I needed it." "I see." And she did. Her uncle had been kind to this broken man, seeing past his anger to the pain beneath. It made her wonder what else Chester might have seen in Archer Hollis. "I should get back to town," she said. "It's getting late." Archer frowned. "I'll ride with you." "That's not necessary." "Didn't say it was." He untied his horse. "Come on." Rather than argue, Zadie fell into step beside him as they walked back toward town, his horse following obediently behind. "How long have you lived in Fort McDowell?" she asked, trying to break the silence. 15 years. Came out from Texas when I was 20. "And your ranch is at large?" He glanced at her. "Large enough. 200 acres, decent grazing land, good water supply. Do you manage it alone? Got a couple of hands that help with the cattle. Live in the bunkhouse." His answers were clipped, factual, as if he'd forgotten how to engage in normal conversation. They were nearly back to town when Zadie gathered the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "Mr. Hollis, what happened to your family? If you don't mind my asking." His step faltered, and for a moment she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low and tight. "Apache raid. 5 years ago, I was in town on business. They hit several homesteads that day. Mine was one of them." The stark simplicity of his words couldn't mask the depth of pain behind them. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Doesn't bring them back." "No." She hesitated, then added, "I lost my husband and child in San Francisco, scarlet fever." "It's not the same, I know, but it's the same," he interrupted. "Loss is loss." They walked in silence the rest of the way to the boarding house. At the steps, Archer stopped. "I'll fix that roof for you, day after tomorrow if the weather holds." Zadie looked up at him, puzzled by this unexpected kindness. "Thank you." He nodded once, then mounted his horse and rode away without another word, leaving Zadie to wonder about the contradictions of the man who seemed both hard as stone and unexpectedly gentle. The next day brought more customers to the store and a growing sense that Zadie might actually belong in Fort McDowell. Several women invited her to join their sewing circle, and the pastor stopped by to welcome her to the community and invite her to Sunday services. By closing time, she had made a decision. She would move into her uncle's house. The boarding house was comfortable, but the idea of having her own space, a home that belonged to her, was too appealing to resist. Mrs. Holloway was understanding when Zadie informed her at supper. "That house has been empty too long," the older woman said. "It needs life in it again, and you're young, you need your own place, not an old woman's boarding house." "I've enjoyed staying here," Zadie assured her, "and I'll miss your cooking." Mrs. Holloway beamed. "Well, you just come by for supper anytime you're feeling lonely. No need to cook for one if you don't want to." The next morning dawned gray and threatening, with dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Zadie opened the store as usual but noticed fewer customers, as if the townsfolk were preparing for the coming storm. Around midday, Archer appeared, carrying a toolbox. "Storm's coming faster than I thought," he said without preamble. "Going to fix that roof now before it hits." "Can you close up early?" Zadie glanced out the window at the darkening sky. "I suppose I should. Let me get my things." She locked the store and followed Archer to her uncle's house. He worked quickly, replacing damaged shingles and sealing leaks while Zadie cleaned inside, preparing the house for her occupancy. As the wind began to pick up, they finished their respective tasks. Archer came down from the roof just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. "It's going to be a bad one," he said, looking at the sky. "You should stay in town tonight." Zadie stood in the doorway, looking at the home she'd just cleaned. "I'd rather stay here. I've brought some supplies, candles, food, water." Archer frowned. "These storms can get dangerous." "Wind, lightning." "I'll be fine," she insisted. "The roof is fixed now, thanks to you." He didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "Lock your doors." "I will." He hesitated, then added, "My ranch is 5 miles west, follow the creek, if you need help." The idea that this taciturn man was offering her refuge touched Zadie more than she expected. "Thank you, but I'm sure it won't come to that." Archer looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he gathered his tools and left, riding away just as the rain began to fall in earnest. By evening, the storm had intensified, with wind howling around the eaves and lightning splitting the sky every few minutes. Zadie sat by the fire she'd built in the small fireplace, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, listening to the tempest outside. Perhaps she should have stayed in town after all. A particularly loud crack of thunder made her jump, and then the sound of something hitting the front porch sent her heart racing. She grabbed the fireplace poker, the closest thing to a weapon she had, and cautiously approached the door. "Who's there?" she called. "It's Archer. Open up." Relief flooded through her as she unbolted the door. Archer stood on her porch, drenched to the skin, his horse tethered to the rail and looking equally miserable. "What are you doing here?" she asked, stepping back to let him in. He removed his hat, water cascading from the brim. "Creek's flooding. Trail back to town will be underwater soon. Thought I should check on you." "You rode all the way from your ranch in this," he shrugged, water dripping from his clothes onto the floor. "Wasn't this bad when I started out?" Zadie closed the door against the howling wind. "You're soaked through. Wait here." She hurried to her uncle's bedroom and found a set of men's clothes, a flannel shirt and trousers that might fit Archer's taller frame. "These were my uncle's," she said, returning with the clothes. "You should change before you catch your death." Archer took the offered garments. "Where?" "Bedroom's through there. I'll make some coffee." While he changed, Zadie busied herself in the kitchen, setting a pot of coffee on the stove and finding some bread and cheese for a simple meal. When Archer emerged, he looked different in Chester's clothes, less formidable somehow, more human. "Better?" she asked. He nodded, running a hand through his damp hair. "Thanks. Coffee's almost ready. Are you hungry?" "Could eat." They sat at the small kitchen table, the storm raging outside while they shared a simple meal by candlelight. The situation felt strangely intimate, though they barely knew each other. "Will your men be worried about you?" Zadie asked. "They know I can take care of myself." He sipped his coffee. "House holding up all right?" "Yes, the roof seems solid. No leaks," he nodded, satisfied. "Good work if I say so myself." That almost smile appeared again, and Zadie found herself smiling back. "Indeed, Mr. Hollis." "Archer," he corrected. She met his eyes. "Archer, then." Something shifted between them in that moment, a small acknowledgement, perhaps, that they were more than just acquaintances. "Your husband," Archer said suddenly. "What was he like?" The question surprised her. "Thomas was kind, gentle, a school teacher. We were married for 2 years before the fever took him." She looked down at her coffee. "Our daughter, Emily, was only 6 months old. She died a week after Thomas." Archer was silent for a long moment. "My son was 4, Jason. My wife, Sarah, was expecting our second." The simple statement, delivered without embellishment, conveyed more pain than any elaborate expression of grief could have. "You think it gets easier?" Zadie asked softly. "The missing them?" Archer's eyes met hers, and in them she saw a reflection of her own pain. "No, but you get stronger. You learn to carry it." They sat in silence after that, listening to the storm. Eventually, Archer rose. "I should go. Trail might be passable by now. In this weather, surely not." He glanced toward the door. "Not proper for me to stay." Zadie laughed, a short, sharp sound. "I think propriety is the least of our concerns tonight, Archer. There's a spare bedroom. You should stay until morning." He seemed to wrestle with himself for a moment, then nodded. "Until morning." The storm continued through the night, rattling windows and shaking the house's foundation. Zadie lay awake in her uncle's bed, acutely aware of Archer's presence in the room across the hall. There was something both comforting and unsettling about having him there, this man who seemed both dangerous and protective, broken yet strong. Eventually, she drifted into a fitful sleep, dreaming of storms and shadowy figures on horseback. She woke to silence. The storm had passed. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, and for a moment Zadie was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then she remembered. Her uncle's house, the storm, Archer. She rose quickly, dressing in yesterday's clothes, and went to the kitchen. It was empty, but the coffee pot had been filled with fresh coffee, still hot. Outside, she could hear the sound of chopping. She found Archer in the backyard, splitting firewood, his back to her. He'd changed back into his own clothes, now dried, and was working with focused intensity, each stroke of the axe precise and powerful. "Good morning," she called. He turned, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "Morning, coffee's ready." "I saw, thank you. You didn't have to do this." He gestured to the growing pile of split logs. "Needed doing. Storm knocked down a tree out back. Might as well make use of it." "Well, thank you. Would you like breakfast?" He seemed about to refuse, then nodded. "Could eat." They shared a simple breakfast of eggs and the last of the bread, sitting across from each other at the kitchen table. There was an ease between them that hadn't been there before, as if the storm had washed away some of the barriers. "I should get to the store," Zadie said as they finished eating. "People will need supplies after the storm." Archer nodded. "I need to check the ranch, see what damage was done." They walked together to the front porch. Archer's horse, which he'd put in the small shed overnight, was saddled and waiting. "Thank you," Zadie said, "for fixing the roof, for checking on me during the storm." Archer studied her face for a moment. "You're a lot like him, you know, Chester, same way of looking at things." Coming from Archer, it seemed like high praise. "I hope I can live up to his legacy." "You will." He mounted his horse, then looked down at her. "I'll be by for supplies in a few days." It wasn't quite a promise, but it felt like one. Zadie watched him ride away, feeling a strange mixture of emotions she wasn't ready to examine too closely. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Zadie ran the store 6 days a week, closing on Sundays for church and rest. She settled into her uncle's house, gradually making it her own with small touches: a quilt here, a vase of wildflowers there. She joined the town's sewing circle and attended social gatherings at the church. And Archer came by regularly for supplies, he said, though his purchases were sometimes as minor as a single box of matches or a bar of soap. Each visit was a little longer than the last, their conversations a little less strained. She learned more about him in these brief encounters: that he'd been a Texas Ranger before coming to Arizona, that he'd built his ranch from nothing, that he had a fondness for penny dreadfuls, that he tried to hide behind purchases of more respectable reading material. In turn, she told him about her life in San Francisco, her brief happiness with Thomas, her dream of someday opening a small school in Fort McDowell. The townsfolk noticed their growing friendship with varying reactions. Some, like Mrs. Holloway, seemed pleased. "That man needs someone to remind him the world isn't all darkness," she said one Sunday after church. Others were less approving. Sheriff Davies pulled Zadie aside one afternoon after observing Archer lingering at the store. "Be careful with Hollis," he warned. "He's unpredictable. Been known to fly into rages over nothing." "He's been nothing but courteous to me," Zadie replied coolly. "Just saying, folks around here know to keep their distance. Man like that, carrying all that anger, it's bound to spill over someday." Zadie bristled at the implication. "Perhaps he's angry because people treat him like he's dangerous. Has he ever actually hurt anyone in town?" The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "No, but then I'll thank you to let me make my own judgments, Sheriff." Despite her confident words, Zadie found herself watching Archer more closely after that conversation, looking for signs of the rage everyone seemed to fear. She saw his temper flare once when a drunken cowboy bumped into him on the boardwalk and failed to apologize. Archer's eyes had gone cold, his body tensing like a coiled spring, but he'd mastered himself and walked away. Far from frightening her, his restraint impressed her. She understood his anger, felt it herself sometimes when grief hit unexpectedly. The difference was, no one expected her, a woman, to lash out. Archer had to fight that battle in public, under the watchful eyes of a town that had already labeled him dangerous. One evening in late September, Archer arrived at the store just as Zadie was closing up. He seemed different, cleaner, more put together, almost nervous. "Need anything?" she asked as she locked the cash drawer. "No." He shifted his weight. "Thought maybe you'd like to go for a ride before the weather turns cold." The invitation caught her by surprise. "A ride?" "There's a place up in the hills. Good view of the valley. Thought you might like to see it." It was the most words he'd strung together at once in all the time she'd known him. "I'd like that," she said. "When?" "Sunday, after church," she smiled. "Sunday would be perfect." He nodded, relief evident in his face. "I'll come by your place around noon." After he left, Zadie found herself humming as she finished closing the store. She was looking forward to Sunday with an anticipation that surprised her. Sunday dawned clear and crisp, with a hint of autumn in the air. Zadie wore her best riding skirt and a blue blouse that matched her eyes, pinning her hair up carefully beneath a small, practical hat. Archer arrived precisely at noon, leading a gentle-looking mare alongside his own stallion. "Borrowed her from the livery," he explained. "Owner owed me a favor." The ride took them out of town and into the hills, following trails that wound through stands of pine and aspen. Archer rode slightly ahead, occasionally pointing out landmarks or naming the wildflowers that still bloomed in sheltered spots. They stopped for lunch in a meadow, spreading a blanket that Archer had brought. He produced sandwiches, apples, and a bottle of lemonade from his saddlebags. "You planned this well," Zadie commented, impressed, that almost smile appeared. "Used to do this with," he stopped, pain flashing across his face. "With Sarah," she supplied gently. He nodded, looking away. "Been a long time since I brought anyone here." The admission touched her deeply. "Thank you for sharing it with me." They ate in companionable silence, surrounded by the beauty of the Arizona wilderness. After lunch, they rode higher, eventually reaching a rocky outcrop that overlooked the entire valley. Fort McDowell was visible in the distance, a tiny collection of buildings nestled against the winding silver ribbon of the river. "It's beautiful," Zadie breathed, dismounting to stand at the edge of the lookout. Archer joined her, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him beside her. "Worth the ride," she smiled up at him. "Definitely worth the ride." His eyes held hers for a long moment, and Zadie felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced since Thomas' attraction, interest, possibility. It both thrilled and frightened her. The moment passed, and Archer stepped back, gesturing toward the horses. "Should head back before sunset." The ride home was quieter, both lost in their thoughts. When they reached her house, Archer helped her dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "Thank you for today," she said, lingering near him. "I enjoyed it very much." "So did I." He seemed about to say more, then changed his mind. "Good night, Zadie." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her. "Good night, Archer." After that day, something shifted between them. Archer visited the store more often, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book he thought she might like, wildflowers he'd picked on the way to town. They rode together on Sundays when the weather permitted, exploring the territory around Fort McDowell. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Some approved, seeing Archer's gradual softening as a sign that he was healing. Others whispered behind their hands, wondering what a respectable woman like Zadie Reynolds saw in the brooding, unpredictable rancher. Zadie ignored the whispers. For the first time since losing Thomas, she felt alive again, interested in something beyond mere survival. Archer made her laugh with his dry observations, challenged her with discussions about books they'd both read, awakened feelings she'd thought buried with her husband. But there were still moments when darkness would overtake him, when a chance remark or the sight of a child would trigger memories he couldn't escape. In those moments, he would withdraw, his eyes going cold and distant, his words becoming clipped and few. The first time it happened in her presence, Zadie had been hurt and confused. They'd been walking through town when a small boy had run past, chasing a hoop. Archer had frozen, his face draining of color, his breathing becoming shallow. Then he'd muttered an excuse and strode away, leaving Zadie standing alone on the boardwalk. He'd avoided her for 3 days afterward, not coming to the store, not responding when she rode out to his ranch to check on him. When he finally appeared again, he offered no explanation, and Zadie didn't press for one. She was learning that Archer's healing wasn't a straight path but a winding trail with setbacks and difficult passages. As autumn deepened and the first frost silvered the ground, Zadie found herself thinking more about the future. The store was thriving, her place in the community secure. For the first time in years, she could imagine a life beyond mere existence, perhaps even love again. But could Archer? That was the question that kept her awake at night. Had he room in his heart for new love, or was it still too filled with grief and anger? The answer came unexpectedly. On a cold November evening, Zadie was closing the store when the door banged open and Sheriff Davies strode in, his face grim. "Miss Reynolds, I need to speak with you about Archer Hollis." Her heart clenched. "What about him?" "There's been an incident at the saloon. Holly's got into a fight with Joe Mercer. It's bad. Is Archer hurt? She asked, already reaching for her shawl. Not as bad as Mercer. Doc's with him now. The sheriff's expression was severe. This is what I warned you about, Miss Reynolds. Holly's temper is dangerous. What happened exactly? Mercer said something that set Holly's off. Next thing, they were brawling, and Holly's nearly killed the man before they pulled him off. Zadie hurried past the sheriff, heading for the doctor's office. Did anyone hear what Mercer said? The sheriff followed her. Does it matter? Civilized men don't resort to violence over words. She turned on him. It matters to me. At the doctor's office, she found Archer sitting on an examination table, shirtless, while the doctor stitched a cut above his eye. His knuckles were raw and bleeding, and bruises were beginning to form on his ribs. He looked up when she entered, his expression a mixture of shame and defiance. "Are you all right?" she asked, moving to his side. "Fine." His voice was flat. "You shouldn't be here." "What happened, Archer?" He looked away. "Ask the sheriff. I'm sure he's told you I'm a dangerous animal." The doctor, an elderly man with kind eyes, finished the last stitch. "That should do it, Hollis. Try not to pull them out this time." Archer nodded, reaching for his shirt. "Mercer, he'll live," the doctor said dryly. "Though his nose will never be quite the same, I'll leave you two to talk." He left, closing the door behind him. "Archer," Zadie said quietly. "Talk to me. What happened?" He struggled into his shirt, wincing as the movement pulled at his bruised ribs. Mercer was drunk, running his mouth. "About what?" Archer's jaw clenched. Me." Zadie was genuinely surprised. "What about me?" "Said you were wasting yourself on a crazy man. Said it was only a matter of time before I hurt you." His voice dropped. "Said you'd be better off with a real man who could give you children, not a broken wreck who couldn't even protect his own family." The cruelty of the words hit Zadie like a physical blow. "Oh, Archer." "He was right about one thing," Archer said, his voice bitter. "I am broken, have been for years." "No." Zadie took his injured hand gently in hers. "Wounded, yes. Grieving, yes. But not broken." He looked at her then, his eyes filled with pain and something else, a desperate, fearful hope. "Why are you still here, Zadie? After everything you've heard about me, after seeing what I did tonight, why?" The question hung between them, weighted with meaning. Zadie knew her answer would define whatever came next for them. "You're worth staying for," she said simply. For a long moment, Archer just stared at her as if unable to comprehend her words. Then, slowly, he raised his hand to her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "You don't get to decide that," she replied, covering his hand with hers. "I do." The kiss, when it came, was gentle at first, then deepening with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally parted, breathless, Archer rested his forehead against hers. "I haven't felt anything but anger for so long," he said. "Didn't think I could feel anything else. And now—" His lips curved in a real smile, the first she'd seen from him. "Now I feel everything." The sheriff was waiting outside when they emerged hand in hand. He took in their expressions and sighed. "Hollis, I should lock you up for assault." "I know," Archer replied evenly. "But Mercer's decided not to press charges. Says he deserved what he got." The sheriff shook his head. "Consider yourself lucky," Archer nodded. "I do." His eyes met Zadie's, and the meaning was clear. As they walked back to Zadie's house, the stars emerging in the clear night sky, Zadie felt a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place. There would be challenges ahead. Archer's grief wouldn't disappear overnight, nor would the town's wariness of him. But they would face those challenges together. At her door, Archer kissed her again, then stepped back reluctantly. "Sunday?" he asked. She smiled. "Sunday." As winter settled over Fort McDowell, Zadie and Archer's relationship deepened. They spent their Sundays together, sometimes riding, sometimes simply sitting by her fire reading to each other. On Christmas Eve, he presented her with a small wooden box he'd carved himself, inlaid with a delicate pattern of leaves and flowers. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "Open it," he urged. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a ring, a simple silver band set with a small turquoise stone. "It was my mother's," Archer said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want you to have it." "As a promise." Zadie looked up at him, her heart full. "A promise of what?" He took her hand. "That I'll try, every day, to be the man you believe I can be, to let go of anger and make room for love." It was the first time he'd spoken the word, and Zadie felt tears spring to her eyes. "I love you, Archer Hollis," she whispered. Broken pieces and all. He slipped the ring onto her finger. "And I love you, Zadie Reynolds, more than I thought possible." They were married in the spring, when the desert bloomed with wildflowers. The ceremony was small, just the pastor, Mrs. Holloway, the doctor, and a few others who had become friends. Even Sheriff Davies attended, offering Archer a grudging handshake and a warning to treat her right. They lived in Archer's ranch house, which Zadie gradually transformed from a place of memories and grief to one of new beginnings. She kept the store in town, riding in each day to work, building a thriving business that served the growing community. Archer began to smile more, to laugh occasionally, to engage with the townsfolk rather than avoiding them. The nightmares that had plagued him for years became less frequent, though they never disappeared entirely. Sometimes, he still had dark days when the weight of his past felt too heavy to bear. On those days, Zadie would simply be present, not pushing, not demanding, just reminding him with her presence that he wasn't alone anymore. A year after their wedding, their son was born, a healthy boy with Archer's dark hair and Zadie's blue eyes. They named him Chester, in honor of the man who had, in a way, brought them together. Standing in the doorway of their bedroom, watching Zadie nurse their newborn son, Archer felt a peace he'd thought lost forever. "What are you thinking?" Zadie asked, looking up to find him watching them. "That I'm the luckiest man alive," he replied, moving to sit beside her on the bed. "That I don't know what I did to deserve this second chance." She leaned against him, their son cradled between them. "Maybe it's not about deserving. Maybe it's just about being open to possibility." "Maybe," he conceded, kissing the top of her head. "Or maybe it's about a stubborn woman who wouldn't give up on me." Zadie smiled. "That too." As the years passed, their family grew. A daughter joined them 2 years after Chester, a spirited girl they named Sarah, acknowledging rather than hiding Archer's first wife. Archer found he could speak of his lost family now without the crushing weight of grief, could remember the joy as well as the pain. Fort McDowell grew as well, expanding as the railroad came through and bringing new residents and businesses. Zadie's store thrived, eventually growing into a proper emporium that she ran with the help of several employees. She also realized her dream of starting a school, teaching in the afternoons after the store closed. Archer expanded the ranch, breeding horses as well as cattle. His reputation changed from that of a dangerous, angry man to a respected rancher and family man. He even served a term on the town council, helping to guide Fort McDowell's growth. Their life wasn't without challenges. Droughts, harsh winters, illnesses, and the normal strains of marriage all tested them. But they faced each challenge together, drawing strength from each other, and from the love they had built. On their 10th anniversary, they rode out to the lookout point where Archer had first brought Zadie, their children old enough now to join them. As the family spread out a picnic, Archer stood with Zadie at the edge of the outcrop, his arm around her waist. "You ever wonder," she asked, "what would have happened if I hadn't come to Fort McDowell, if we'd never met?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. I'd still be angry, he said finally. Still fighting the whole world, still alone. She turned in his arms, looking up at his face, older now, lined with experience, but open in a way it hadn't been when they first met. And now. He smiled, a full, unreserved smile that still had the power to make her heart skip. Now I'm at peace, most days anyway, only most days, she teased. Well, there's still Sheriff Davies, Zadie laughed. He retired last year, Archer. Old habits, he said with a shrug, then grew serious. You saved me, you know. When you said I was worth staying for, no one had ever seen value in me like that. Not after. I saw a good man in pain, she said simply. A man who needed someone to believe in him until he could believe in himself again. He kissed her then, a tender kiss filled with gratitude and love. Thank you for staying. From the meadow below, their children called to them, eager to continue their adventure. Hand in hand, Archer and Zadie made their way down to join them, moving toward the future they had built together, a future neither had thought possible in the depths of their grief. A future made possible by the courage to remain open to love even after devastating loss. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, bathing the Arizona landscape in golden light, Zadie looked at her family, at the life she and Archer had created from the ashes of their separate tragedies, and knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, no matter how painful, were worth taking. And some people, no matter how broken they might seem, were absolutely worth staying for.